Confident, confident, confident. I can be confident, 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 confident. I can be confident at work.
Hello and welcome to episode 110 of the Confident at Work podcast. I'm your host and your confidence coach, Anna Manning. Today we're talking about how to deal with confrontation. So loads of people that I've worked with and just people that I chat to tell me, I hate confrontation, I don't like it, I try and avoid it. Today we're going to explore why we might be avoiding it and how you can stop avoiding it. When I was preparing for this episode, I looked up the dictionary definition of avoid, and then I thought, well, what would be the opposite of avoiding? So I checked that out too, and it gave me a list of words, the opposite of avoid: seek, accept, pursue, embrace, and welcome. And I thought that was a really interesting place to start because when we're avoiding, it has a certain action to it, but it also has a certain feel to it, doesn't it? When you're avoiding something, you know you're avoiding it, you know you want to do it or you need to do it, and you're avoiding it. And I thought those words just perfectly summed up what the opposite feeling state to avoiding is. So when you think about avoiding confrontation, maybe with those list of words in mind, the opposite might be seeking resolution, accepting discomfort, pursuing what I know is right, embracing the part of me that shies away, and welcoming an honest response from someone. So make of those words what you will, but I just thought they were a really interesting starting point and a place to kind of feel into. What if you sought resolution around confrontation? What if you accepted that there may be discomfort for you and the person that you're speaking to? What if you pursued doing what was right, doing what you know you should be doing? What if you actively pursued it? You sought out situations that needed resolution and you went towards them instead of avoiding them. What if you embraced conflict? What would that mean? I think it would mean embracing the part of you that might fear confrontation, that might be really uncomfortable with it, that might think, well, it's very unpredictable and, I have to know how this is going to go and I have to control the outcome. Maybe you would embrace the uncertainty and the parts of you that feel afraid or feel like a beginner when it comes to dealing with confrontation. Maybe you would welcome an honest conversation, a chance to move a situation forward, to clear the air, to set the boundary, whatever this is, whatever this confrontation is about. And I decided to approach this episode with you a little bit differently. So if you were coaching with me one-on-one and you said, I'm avoiding confrontation and I need to stop doing that, I would want to know a few things. I'd want to know what's happening now when you're avoiding confrontation. What's the situation? Why is it a problem for you? What happens if you don't change anything? What happens if you keep avoiding confrontation? How does that play out for you? What would you actually like to have happen? Like, what would you want to do instead? If you weren't avoiding it, what would you be doing? And then, I guess last of all, I would want to know, what's your plan? What are you actually going to commit to? What are you going to change? So that's the pattern that we're going to follow in this episode. Now, obviously, I am with you individually, but I can't have that backwards and forwards dialogue with you unless you're my client. And if you're my client and listening to this and you're avoiding confrontation, please just bring it to your coaching session and let's figure it out. But if you're not my client and you feel this is a problem for you, avoiding confrontation, go to the show notes and copy and paste out the questions that I'm going to take you through in this episode. And right along with this episode, obviously not if you're driving or operating heavy machinery or whatever, but if you're not doing that and you can, cut and paste the questions out of the show notes so that you can actually go through them with me, because I want to do this with you one-on-one. I want to take you through. I don't want this to just be about me telling you how to stop avoiding confrontation. I want this to be like an unearthing to you I want it to be like a coaching session for you where you figure out what's happening right now, where and why are you avoiding? What's getting in your way? And what would you like to do differently? And the first question is, when was the last time specifically that you avoided confrontation? And if you're going to do this with me live, pick an example. Think of a time. When was the last time specifically that you avoided a confrontation? What comes to mind? The other thing that I want to know is, what does confrontation mean to you? What is behind that word? What's your frame of reference? For some people, it might mean a verbal sparring match. For some people, it might mean just a really uncomfortable conversation. For some people, it might mean I think the other person's going to be annoyed with me and therefore I would call that a confrontation. But what actually is it? What do you make that word mean? Because most of us don't have a dictionary readily available in our head. Actually, what words mean to us is a combination of stuff we've learned, experiences that we've had. So, what does confrontation mean to you? And I also might want to know, what are you getting out of it? So, doing it the way you're doing it now, avoiding confrontation, you're probably gaining something, or at least trying to gain something. Is it harmony? Is it a quiet life? Is it everyone liking you and you getting along with everyone? Or is it avoiding something, like avoiding an argument, a disagreement, a challenge, avoiding your head being on the chopping block? If you're avoiding confrontation, what are you actually avoiding? It's usually a feeling. So if you're avoiding confrontation, what feeling are you unwilling to feel? Is it discomfort? Is it fear? And my next question for you is, why is this a problem? Why is you avoiding confrontation even an issue? Is it an issue? I'm not going to assume that it's a problem for you until you tell me that it is. So, is avoiding confrontation a problem? Good to know, yes or no? And if you say yes, then why is it a problem? And here's some things that it might be. Do you end up tolerating stuff that you actually don't want to tolerate when you avoid confrontation? Does it lead to unfairness? Does it lead to you feeling frustrated or resentful? Does it create more of a problem if you're actually letting something go on longer because you wish to avoid the confrontation? Do you end up feeling like a victim in a situation? Why is it a problem for you? And you might want to think of that specific example. So I asked you at the beginning, like, tell me specifically, when was the last time that you avoided a confrontation? And apply this to that. Why is that a problem for you? And the next question is, what happens if you don't change something in relation to this? So you could just realize from listening to this that you do avoid confrontation, but let's just explore what happens if you don't change anything, because you don't have to. You can just keep doing what you're doing now and avoid confrontation for the rest of your career. That is an available option. And I don't have an agenda in terms of whether you should or whether you shouldn't. But if you're going to make that decision that you want to keep avoiding confrontation, I want you to be really clear about what the result is for you and choose knowing the result. It's almost like you're going to buy a house, you have the survey, so you know that the roof is a bit leaky and that there's a problem with the shower. You might still buy the house, but at least you know you're buying it with your eyes open. Same situation here. You might know you're avoiding confrontation and you might be like, I've got my eyes open. I know what the problem is. I know what it creates when I do it, but I'm okay with it. I'm still buying the house. In which case, great, carry on. But let's see really specifically, what is the result of it for you? So cast your mind 5 years forward into your career. What happens if you continue to avoid confrontation? Let's take it to its maximum and say you avoid every confrontation for the next 5 years in your career. What happens? Where do you end up? How do you see that going? And go even further. What about if we go all the way to 10 years into your career? All the way to you being the most senior leader that you can imagine wanting to be? What happens if you avoid confrontation? What's the cost? And my next question is, what would you like to have happen? So, on this avoiding confrontation issue, what would you like to have happen? And I thought about that. And I came up with a little snippet, a few lines. And maybe if you're doing this along, you could write yours out. But here was mine. I would like to be brave in having hard conversations. I would like to do it without too much delay and with sensitivity. I would like to remember that it's not about me, but I'm here to do a job. And sometimes doing my job well requires that I have hard conversations. In the long run, it's better for everyone. So when I think about avoiding confrontation, that's what I'd like to have happen. I just came out with that. And maybe you can write yours. Spell out for me, spell out for yourself exactly what you would like to have happen. And my next question is, so what's your plan? What will you commit to? And I want you to be really specific. Maybe that's, I will have those 2 conversations that I have been avoiding by Friday next week. I will book time in the diary with those 2 people right now, and I will send them a bullet point list of things that I want to cover. Open brackets so that I don't chicken out later, close brackets. Maybe you want to create a rule for how you are going to operate in relation to perceived confrontation. Maybe you're going to really question, actually, is this a confrontation or is it just a hard conversation? Maybe you're going to reframe how you think about it. My old co-lead, in my last job, I co-led a team with a wonderful guy called Nick. And he had this rule. And his rule was that he would run at the fire. And I loved this rule. So instead of avoiding those situations and those moments and those conversations, which he knew were going to be really hard, he had a rule, a hard and fast rule that he ran at the fire. And it served him so many times because instead of just avoiding, his brain was like, we run at fires. That's what we do. And so he went along with it. And of course, what happens when you run at fires consistently? You sort things out quicker. You have more conversations, which probably weren't as bad as you thought they were going to be. Stuff doesn't rumble on as long. There were all kinds of benefits that he found from running at fires. So you maybe want to take Nick's rule and use it for yourself, or maybe there's a rule that you want to create, that you want to stand by, that you want to live by, that you want to work by. And maybe you can imagine it in an interview 3 years from now, they will say to you, how do you deal with confrontation and conflict? And you might say, I decided that whenever there is a potential for confrontation, I was going to seek resolution, accept discomfort, pursue the conversation, and welcome an honest conversation. Now, that is a for instance, right? How do I know? But maybe you create a rule in your own mind. And 3 years from now, you're going to be saying to some interviewer, I decided that and I've stuck by it ever since. So I came up with 3 examples of avoiding confrontation where I've coached people through it and I've thought through it. And you can see whether you recognize any of these. So number 1 was avoiding a difficult conversation about an underperforming direct report. So let's say there's somebody in your team and you know that they're not performing, the work that you're getting back is substandard, or there's some other kind of performance issue. Maybe you notice that this is happening, but you also fear that a frank conversation could damage your working relationship with that person. So instead of actually just addressing the issue with them directly, you avoid the conversation and hope the situation will just resolve itself or disappear on its own. The consequence is that that person's performance doesn't improve. The situation doesn't actually go away on its own. And other people in the team have started to notice that person's underperformance, and it's also frustrating and having an impact on them. The particular individual is also unaware of their underperformance and is therefore missing an opportunity for improvement and for taking necessary corrective action. While you continue to get more and more frustrated and resentful. Sounds like something that happens? It's something that I've coached on loads of times. Now, what do you think that that person should do? They've noticed the underperformance, they've avoided the conversation, and now it's having wider impacts on them, the person, and the team. What would you advise them to do? How would you advise them to handle it? What would you need to remind them of? Scenario number 2 is not addressing disagreements in a leadership meeting. So during leadership team meetings, there is a senior leader who consistently disagrees with the strategic direction proposed by your CEO, but they choose to stay silent out of fear that voicing the concern may create conflict or be seen as disloyal. As a result, they avoid expressing objections, even though that the proposed course of action could actually cause harm to the organization. The consequence is that this change, this thing that's going to happen, is implemented without thorough discussion and potentially leads to an issue down the line, which could have been mitigated or avoided. What would your advice to them be? My third example is declining to address a colleague's disruptive behavior. So a particular board member frequently cuts in and talks over female members of the board. The board member who notices it knows they should ask the colleague to wait their turn to speak and or say to the chair, "I've noticed this is happening. Can you please ensure that everyone has time to be heard fairly?" But they fear that request might cause tension or an argument. To avoid the possible confrontation, they decide to say nothing, even though it affects the quality of discussion and the effectiveness of that board. The consequence is that the disruptive behavior continues. What would you advise that person to do? Do you want them to keep avoiding that confrontation or do something? And I'm on a roll now, so here's the last example. Refusing to discuss an unfair workload. So let's say an employee realizes they've been assigned way more tasks than their peers, leading to long hours and stress. They know that speaking to their supervisor could potentially lead to a reallocation of tasks, but they fear that they might be perceived as a complainer or being uncooperative. To avoid asking their superior about the workload, the employee continues to take on excessive work, even though it's causing burnout. The consequence is that the employee becomes increasingly stressed, overworked, and potentially burns out, or it leads to mistakes in their work, and the imbalance of the workload remains unaddressed. What do you want that employee to do in that scenario? Now, they're just a few examples of really common scenarios where people just want to avoid the confrontation. And maybe you recognize some of those examples. Maybe you've done them in the past, or maybe you're doing them right now. In all of those examples, it was dead easy to give advice to the person, wasn't it? About what they should do. What's more difficult is to actually do it. So whenever you're avoiding a confrontation, I want you to come back to this podcast episode and listen to it with fresh ears and go through the coaching questions which I've offered. Write them down or type them out, what your answers are to those questions. Coach yourself or allow me to coach you through that scenario. And maybe give yourself some advice. What do you think you should do? Avoid confrontation or something else? If you want to work with me, there are 2 ways that you can do that right now. The first is you can come and work with me on a private one-to-one basis. This is a confidential place where we'll explore your challenges and help you to feel more confident at work. I will leave a link in the show notes. If you want to explore that with me, I will show you the work that we need to do in order to get you feeling confident, and you can decide whether or not you want to do it. The second way is to come and join the Members Club. So our doors are reopening on the 1st of September, 2024, which is next week. And we're welcoming in new members. For the rest of 2024, we're going to be doing Confident Foundations. There is a course within the Members, and that course takes you through how to build solid foundations for your confidence. So we're going to be doing that work together, training, coaching, thinking about how to build really strong foundations for your confidence at work. So if you want to come and join us, it's your chance to learn more deeply, to apply the things you're learning in the podcast and subjects in more depth, including that confident foundations, which we're going to be doing together between September and Christmas. So you're very welcome to come and join us. I will leave a link in the show notes, and I'll see you in next week's episode. Bye.
Confidence, confidence, confident. I can be confident. Confidence, confidence, confident. I can be confident at work.